Great strides have been made toward global gender equality. The number of women leaders continues to grow. Society's mindset about educating girls continues to evolve. Opportunities for women continue to increase. All mark a growing tide supporting gender equality, but we're far from reaching the ideal. In certain places, women still cannot vote, inherit property, earn a fair wage, or even travel unescorted. These gaps in women's rights, especially in contrast to men, abound from continent to continent. Professor Dr. Bahiyyih Nakhjavani is currently touring with her most recent book, The Woman Who Read Too Much, a fictionalized account of the real-life Iranian heroine Tahereh. Today, Dr. Nakhjavani sat down with us to discuss gender issues.
We all suffer from any form of oppression. I think in the West there is a different way of expressing the ideas of sexual equality, which may or may not be necessarily mature yet. Even in the West, we're trying to understand this problem. It's going to take us a long time. I don't think we should evaluate what gender equality means according to anybody's definition of it right now. But I do think that we should all be thinking about it, and we should all question ourselves about it and realize we cannot be complacent and look for escapes in cultural exceptionalism, exclusivity. Nobody is treating women right in the world. Nobody. So how we express that inequality or discrimination is very different all over the planet. And at the same time, it's all wrong. It seems to me that our biggest challenge is implementation of laws. So it's very easy to give lip service by establishing a law. Well, first of all, there are many governments that don't even establish the laws. So you first have to address the question of what are the laws saying in a country. But even when you have them put into law, the biggest gap seems to be from the paper to the act and to the implementation. So obviously, governments need to be looking at ways in which they can ensure that whatever laws for the protection of women do exist, and the equal nature of that protection, so that women have equal rights, are being implemented and are not just being used to pretend that they are being given equality. I think this is actually a problem which everybody faces all over the world. I know that I've lived in the West and I've seen that same problem in the West, but we shouldn't find that that is therefore an excuse for the inequalities that exist in the law. I think implementation is the biggest challenge about all kinds of crises we face, not just gender. It's also true, again, as I was saying, about the environment. It's true in so many levels. We talk about extremes of wealth and poverty. We talk about democratic principles of equality there, but implementation is a great gap. So if governments can find ways of evaluating their own implementation, in an objective way, and being open so that they can be evaluated by various global indicators, so that it's an objective analysis and evaluation, not their version of what it is. That means we should all trust each other. And it's very difficult to tell a government to trust another government. But ultimately, if we're going to get this problem solved, it has to be with an understanding that we are part of the human race, that the human race is one, and that we shouldn't let these barriers come between us simply because the only way to be effective is to double check and counterbalance our words with deeds. never solve the problem of sexual discrimination if we think in terms of victimization and blame. We are an evolving society. We evolve at different levels in different parts of the world. Even in our individual lives, we have different rates of change and development, different times when we become mature or not. It's not a question of blame as if there was some absolute. We're learning how to live together. We're learning, because of the conditions of the world around us, that we need to change attitudes towards each other. There was a time when the patterns of sexual domination by men over women may have served some purpose. It no longer does, and so we have to change it. In the same way that there was a time when you could throw garbage away and it would fade away and disappear, now it no longer does. We have to be concerned with the environment. There was a time when we could, with impunity, have wars and we'd get over it. We no longer can, because wars could completely destroy the human race. So there are certain things that we've done in the past which may have, well, I won't say right or wrong, but happened, and we got over them and we carried on because the society was at a certain stage of development. It was either based on a family or based on a clan or based on a tribe or even based in terms of national identity. But we're living in an age today where we're so interrelated, where society is so bound up with everybody's actions that we can't have an action without profound consequences going generations and across the planet. So we have to readjust our values. And this is just about growing up. In the same way that as a child you could bawl and scream and howl and throw your food on the ground and someone would forgive you, well, when you become an adolescent and you do that, the consequences are much more severe. And we have to start learning self-control. We have to start learning respect. And of course, we were taught the fundamentals of that respect all through the ages. All the religions have taught us that. But when we come to a stage where we have to assume social maturity, collective maturity, we need laws, we need principles that are effective for the planet. This idea of racial as well, but sexual discrimination is something that we've only now begun to articulate. Now we're ready to think about it because we've grown up as a human race. But the kinds of solutions that I have seen are increasing efforts being made for the education of girls, increasing efforts being made to give girls the same opportunities in education so that they're getting as much encouragement to go into the sciences as into the arts. Then taking it one step further at the university level, they should be as encouraged to go into postgraduate work, graduate work, and then there should be some solution to that in the economic sense so that there's an employment for girls and there's equal opportunity. These are all the levels at which implementation can happen, and it is beginning to happen. Of course, it can never be fast enough, so there have to be interim measures taken. In some countries they have quotas, in other countries they have other kinds of lobbying groups. It has to be done in whichever way governments find possible. But I can see already that even in the most remote parts of the world, especially with the education of girls, there is a growing awareness of how this problem needs to be addressed. What often happens is that the children end up being more enlightened than the fathers and the grandfathers, and even the grandmothers and mothers. And so there needs to be perhaps some solution found to help to educate the older ones. Of course, it's much more difficult when you get older, but I see that gap sometimes, and it has tragic results very often. And then we blame gender equality for the confusion, and we want to go back to the old ways. But in fact, what we should be doing is educating our parents as well as educating the children, educating the family as well as educating the youngest members of it. And there are ways in which people are beginning to do that. And I think the secret really is, first and foremost, education.